Chapter 7. The Armory. Ray Whitfield. The Scale. The Woman in the Hallway. Oscar McQuinn. Talon's Office. 1997. The armory stank of oiled steel and old blood, and the dry reek of dust. Crates lined the walls, some stacked neat and some askew, as if a man had given up midway through organizing them and left the rest to chance. Rifles, sidearms, blades, ammo in tins with rust around the edges, and belts of cartridges coiled like dead snakes. Hooks jutted from concrete, and on them hung harnesses and bandoliers, and old canvas vests stiff with sweat. Evan was down near the end of the room, crouched low, and he was rifling through one of the sacks they brought back from the Dreadlocks place. He had a wiry frame that always looked on the verge of collapse, like a scarecrow taught to move. His hair was dark and cut short with a knife by the looks of it, and his shoulders were set close. His arms bore the scabby aftermath of an old burn. It was like a pale pinkish color against his dirt-colored skin. He wore a revolver low on his thigh, and a bowie knife in a sheath lashed to his boot with cord. His hands moved quick and careful as he parsed out bundles of ammunition and sorted gear by type and purpose, whispering to himself as he worked. Ray Whitfield was standing near a wall where an old shelving unit had collapsed and been propped back up with rebar. Ray was a little more filled out than Evan, and his eye level came to just about the top of Budsworth's head. His beard came in patches, and his teeth were bad, but he smiled easy and fought hard. He was wiping blood off a hunting knife with an oil rag and humming tunelessly to himself. He looked up without stopping when he heard Bud's voice. "Well, I guess I ought to put away my shotgun," said Bud. "Right," said Ray. Evan looked back. "Might need it if you're around me too long," he joked. Ray chuckled, and Bud allowed a grunt that passed for a laugh. He crossed the room, boots clacking belly against the concrete, and approached the mouth where his sawed-off lived, stubby-barreled and brutal, and it was seated next to Town's golden culp. He holstered the shotgun, took a breath, and wandered over to the corner where the old, rust-bitten scale sat sunken into the floor. He stepped on, and the needle twitched, then settled. 198.5, it read. He stared like it insulted him. He kicked off his boots and let his pants fall, and climbed back up. Evan stopped rummaging and looked on from across the room. He opened his mouth, then thought better of it and closed it again. The scale now read 197 even. "You getting that 8-pack yet?" Ray asked, still grinning. "Don't seem like it," Bud said. 197. I used to have one. "I got abs," Evan muttered. Bud looked up at him, straight-faced. Then he tugged his pants back on, slow. "Yeah, bunch of little mosquito bites on your belly." Ray snorted. Bud gave a dry grunt of approval. After a beat, Bud dusted his palms. "I gotta get on now." "We gonna get this finished?" Ray asked. "Talon says we gonna work on it a bit every day. You can finish if you like," Bud said as he began to turn and walk out. Evan turned. gave a small shake of his head directed at Ray. And Bud narrowed his eyes and turned around, as if he'd hear the movement Evan made. "What's that about?" he asked, voice low. "Nothing," Evan said. "Too quick." Bud looked over at Ray. "He got some sort of problem?" Ray shrugged. "Don't know," he said. Bud grunted. "I'ma see what I'm weighing," Evan said, as he stepped out of his boots and kept the rest on. He stepped on, then looked down, and stepped off. "What's it say?" asked Ray. "Nothing," Evan mumbled. He stood between the scale and the two men, as if he'd hide it, and Ray craned over, squinting. 136, Ray called out like some sort of sports announcer. "Big man." That same smile that wasn't quite a sign of happiness glinted across Bud's face, and he tilted his chin up and looked at Evan. "Skin and bones," he said, shifting his eyes back to Ray. "Skin and bones." Evan sighed, and he crossed the room back to the sack he was working on. "Come on, why ain't you two shut up?" Ray cracked a smile, crooked and yellow, and Bud smiled back, and they acknowledged the humor. Bud leaned against the doorframe still, and his hand rested high on the wood where the paint had been rubbed away. Evan was hunched over the sack, rummaging. Ray slid down the wall and sat with his legs spread wide, and his elbows hung over his knees. "He's taller than me, too," Bud said, the words dry in his mouth. Evan looked up, a jerky bag half tilted in his hand. He'd dropped it earlier, and dirt now clung to the bottom like it belonged there. He scoffed and shook his head. "Everybody's taller than you, buddy," he said, voice full of toothy satisfaction. Ray let out a breath like a laugh, and smiled and turned his face down into his hand, and the edge of it rested on his lips. He bit his lip a little but said nothing. Yeah, Bud said. His eyes rolled just barely. "Hell," Evan continued, "even the women, even Freed." Ray's smile curled a bit deeper, and he wiped it away with his palm as if he'd hide it. Evan popped a piece of jerky in his mouth and chewed, and watched Bud. "No, sir," Bud said. "Yes, sir," Evan continued. "She's almost right up there with you." "I've always been taller than Freed." Bud snarled a bit. "Maybe a centimeter." Evan smiled and continued rummaging. "Freed got them long legs," Evan said after a bit. "Walk like you mean to trample something, like she was bred to run from raiders." "Or chase them down," said Ray. A larger smile cut across his face, and he'd looked back to Evan. The group all laughed, even Budsworth. He looked out into the hallway. "She's always wearing that smirk," he said. "Like she knew something." "I don't think she ever did, but she smiled like it." Ray sat back. "Might be she did," he said. "Sometimes people know the whole truth and still get caught in it like it's new." Evan shook his head. "I think she just liked messing with you, Bud." Bud narrowed his eyes just slightly, and his brows furrowed, his hands twitching and trembling a bit. He looked to the floor. Yeah, maybe," he said. He stepped off the doorframe, his boots loud against the floor. "Don't go crying on us now, buddy," Evan called after him, a grin behind it. Bud didn't turn. He raised a hand in the air and waved them off without looking. The gesture somewhere between goodbye and go to hell. The hallway was a place long gone without sunlight, and Bud moved through it as if he would patrol it. And his shoulders swung heavy and slight with his walk, deliberate but unhurried. His eyes caught the shape before his mind put a name to it. A woman crouched low, the canvas of her pack yawning open before her. Her hair spilled out in a mass the color of drying rust, autumn leaves going wet under rain. He'd seen her before, often in passing. Never heard her voice, not even sure if she'd had one. Her presence was a quiet one, but not so quiet as to go unnoticed, especially by him. Women in the black tide were rare as silver foxes, and when they did show up, they were cold and hard, or else dead before they learned how to be. This one, he didn't know which she was yet. She wore her silence like some blade. She had passed him or stood next to him before with little regard to his personal space, and once she'd passed close, shoulder brushing his in a hallway too wide for it to be necessary. Another time she'd stood at his side while he spoke with John Wyatt, and he hadn't heard her come up, and he'd thought of it then. Now her back was to him, or it was to the world. He didn't know which. She rocked slight as she unpacked something, and as he walked, she seemed to tilt her head to the right and glance back at him, though he couldn't be sure of her gaze. Her eyes small things, and they were set a bit too far apart, but in a charming way. Her cheeks were poked with red dots of some kind of acne that would be mistaken for freckles if one were to look from far off. And her skin was white like an albino, though she wasn't one. Her lips almost as light, and fading into the rest of her skin. She didn't look directly at him. Or maybe she did. You couldn't be sure. As he passed, her movement sharpened, like some signal. Or maybe not. She gyrated a bit and she held her head position. And she seemed to put her hands up and bring her ass from one side to the other. He looked just for a second, long enough to see if she'd look too. He thought she did, and he wondered if the movement was to be directed at him, the thought sending a small shiver of emotion through his body. Maybe she was listening to music. Maybe it was just the way her body worked. Maybe it was for him. Maybe. He didn't stop to find out. He kept on down the hall, and the light buzzed overhead like flies in some sort of dry wind. The sound of the place was never truly gone, just settled. A low hum of life packed tight and dangerous. He reached a stairwell and started up. Coming down opposite was Oscar McQuinn. He was thick in the middle like a barrel left out in the rain. And he may have been shorter than Bud, but you could never get a good look. And his face was round and boyish in the wrong way. And his hair curled in tight brown knots across his scalp, and his skin was the color of dried mud, and his eyes were near the same. He wore a black shirt gone sun-washed and thin in the armpits, and his jeans were husky cuts, ragged at the heel from dragging on the ground too long. His belt was pulled tight and rested above his hips like a yoke, and in that belt was something metallic and ugly, a pistol of sorts, though Bud could not see it well enough to say what kind. They passed without a word, just two men in orbit of the same cold sun, and they gauged each other like wolves crossing trails. Oscar didn't look up. Bud's eyes lingered on him a second longer than was polite. He reached the top of the stairwell and turned the corner. Ahead in the corridor stood Hussein Beaumont and Shane Luke Stuckmeyer, voices low and close, one arm on the wall between them like a pair of schoolboys. Hussein was nodding along, face unreadable under his beard, and Shane Luke moved his hands when he talked, jerking them like he was shaping something in the air. And they glanced and glanced again as Bud walked past, and as they continued to speak. He reached Talon's door and rapped his knuckles on it twice before pushing it open without pause. A courtesy given but not offered. He stepped inside, and the door swung wide behind him, and the shadow of his frame stretched long into the room. "There he is," said Talon, rising from his place beyond the makeshift desk with a practiced ease. It was a haphazard thing built from the wreckage of older furniture, scavenged planks laid across mismatched sawhorses, and the wall around it were hung with naps and notes and relics of some different age. Tattered papers and broken radios, and a revolver nailed to the wood like a crucifix. The room bore the rank of leadership in its clutter. There was no elegance to it, but it carried a kind of weight. It was no more than a cleared-out supply room, and it was lit by a single oil lamp on the corner of the desk, casting shadows that danced in long, crooked arcs across the floor. A rusted fan sat dead in the corner, and a single wooden chair leaned like a drunk against a far wall, and the room smelled faintly of tobacco and old sweat. Talon himself was a figure changed by time, but not undone by it. He'd been handsome once, and in ways still was, though some ways had shifted. The sharp cheekbones that once turned heads were now softened by stress, and his jaw was shaded with a short black beard, trimmed close but not precise. And his hair had thinned at the top, and what remained he'd kept slipped back in a vague semblance of control. His eyes were dark and moved quickly, as if he were to tally some debt not yet paid. He wore now what was functional. A dark thermal top rolled at the sleeves, and military pants cinched with a nylon belt, and his boots scuffed and laced loose like he was always half expecting a move. "Yep, here I am," said Bud as he wandered in. He was loose in the shoulders and casual in the way a man might be when he's thinking about something heavier than what's in front of him. "You look like some sort of buff Clint Eastwood," said Tom. "Handsome guy." He reached up and scratched his beard, and Bud looked him over. "You don't look so bad yourself," he said. Bud didn't smile. "What's got you down, buddy?" Town said. Bud leaned against the wall with one shoulder, eyes unreadable. "Remember that kid, Cade?" he said. "Scrawny kid with the black hair." Talon was already nodding, his fingers tapping out a thought he hadn't spoken yet. "One that went on the raid with us?" Bud added. "Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I have him in the basement if you're looking for him." Bud's eyes sharpened, narrowed like a blade being drawn. Talon caught it. "With them prisoners?" Bud asked. "Well, he ain't with them, just next to them," said Tom. "Look, we're pushing it with over 40 people in this place anyway. And with all due respect, buddy, I don't run this place to be judged by you. But you're gonna be, said Bud. Talon's mouth drew flat, and he rose from the chair fast, and the lamp's flame caught the shine in his eyes. Bud didn't move. Talon sighed, the weight back on him, and he eased himself down again. I know, Bud, I know. I've been stressed out about this all-out war ship. He paused, and his fingers trembled beneath his chin. Bud waited. I take it you want to give him a better room. I wanted to, too. Guess we're all filled up, then? Bud said. Ready to burst, said Tom. Unless you got a suggestion, he continued. His voice had gone softer then, like he may have known one was coming. Bud leaned back against the wall and let his arms cross, and then put one boot over the other, and the light from the desk lamp edged his face in bronze. And he didn't speak for a while, just stared at the floor as if the answer might be hiding there among the scuffs and the boot dirt and the blood that never quite washed out. Gio Munoz, said Bud. Talon's head came up like a dog hearing its name in a foreign tongue. His eyes narrowed, but there was no misunderstanding. What about him? We kick him out, replace him with Cade. Talon pressed his lips together. They paled under the pressure, and he looked down, and his hand dragged across the surface of the desk, slow and tired. Talon, he ain't done shit in a long time, Bud said. Talon glanced up from beneath his brow. He'd been on rage with us, though, and in fights, he said. Yeah, and not so much as picked up a damn rifle, said Bud. Not once. Okay, Talon said, his voice thick. His fingers had wandered to his beard, and he pulled on the bristles absent-mindedly, as if trying to feel a thought out through the pain of it. Okay, he said again, slower this time, and his eyes wandered back and forth, then down, then back again. We'll do that, he said, pointing a finger at Budsworth. But getting him ought to be on you. You deal with him. Bud smiled. It was not a gentle smile. It was the kind of smile a dog gives when it knows there's a bone in the yard and nobody else knows it's there. No problemo, boss. Talon cracked a grin and gave a quiet laugh, low and dry. Hey, you have all the good ideas, but I have my moments sometimes, don't I? Said Bud. Okay, I admit it, said Tom. You do. He paused, looked up at Bud, and for a second the room felt smaller, like the years had wound backward. There was that gleam in his eye again, the way a man looks when he's seen 2 times at once. You fucking dumb son of a bitch, he said, still smiling. Bud smiled back. He turned to go, one hand already on the knob when Callan called after him. I like that sometimes you take charge, Bud. I actually don't mind. Bud stopped and looked back. Talon was leaning forward now, his head slightly dipped, voice serious. We keep each other on point, he said. It's a good team. Bud nodded. Always has been, he said. Then he stepped out into the hall, and the door east shut behind him with a click. A small smile stayed on his face for a few seconds more, and it lingered like a caste. There was a way about town. Even gruff as sandpaper, he could still charm a bastard like Budsworth Rothland.